Hi, as always, here's our story recap video for this week. Another chance for you to watch this week's story from the Big Fish Kids Club, and as always, stick around until the end where I'm going to have a couple of questions just to make you think a little bit more about this week's story. Now, this term we've been looking, haven't we, at God's great family, and we've seen some great things about God's great family and how we can be part of God's great family. But this week we're going to see that actually everybody in God's great family is really, really important to Him. And sometimes even the youngest in His family can do amazing and incredible things and help out those that are older in His family to know and follow Him in the best way possible. But I wonder, have you ever made a promise to be good, to do the best that you can be? I'm sure you have. But I wonder, have you also forgotten about that promise and perhaps done some things that were a bit naughty again? Again, I'm sure you have. And I'm sure you have because, well, I have. I've made promises to be good and do the best I can be. And then I've also messed up and done things that are wrong. We all do that, don't we? And actually the people in our story today were a bit like that as well. You see, God's special people, the Israelites, they should be the ones who would surely follow God and do what was good and do what was right all the time, because He showed them amazing and incredible miracles, didn't He? He saved them from Egypt. He did amazing things with them. He led them to the promised land, and they would follow Him for a bit and remember what was good, but just like us, they would then forget. And they would stop doing what was good and following God and instead just start, doing their own thing. And, I'm sure it would have made God look a bit like this, by here. Because His people had forgotten all about Him and forgotten about following and trusting Him. And the Bible says that when God's people forget all about Him and following Him, it actually makes Him feel really, really sad. But God's people, the Israelites, hadn't just forgotten about Him, but they'd forgotten about the rules that He'd given them. The first rule that God had given them was that they should only follow and worship, Him. They shouldn't follow or worship any other gods. But you see, the Israelites had made up their own gods, things called idols. And they'd made little statues out of wood or stone, and they were praying to these things. Even though they were just made up and they couldn't do anything, that's what they were doing. And it had made God feel really, really sad. And the reason that it makes God really, really sad is because, God knows what us doing things that are wrong means. God knows what it means when we turn away from Him. Because actually, you see, we're down here on earth and God is up in heaven. And actually, whenever we turn away from Him and go our own way and do our own thing, whenever we perhaps do things that are wrong or say things that are wrong or think things that are wrong, actually, it forms a great big barrier that, separates us from God. It stops us from getting to know Him, and it stops us from being part of His family forevermore. And that's why it makes God so sad, because actually He wants us to be with Him forever. But things in Israel were about to change. You see, there was going to be a new king. I'm sure all the people were really, really excited. There would have been some big parties planned and a huge procession through the streets, and all the people would have gathered to get a glimpse of the new king. And as the horses would have come down, or the camels or whatever they were riding on, would have made their way down the streets of Jerusalem leading towards the palace, everyone would have been really excited, looking out for the king. And as they looked out and they saw the king coming, they were a little bit, shocked, because as they looked out, they said, is that the king? But he's only a child. You see, we're used to kings and queens being really, really old, aren't we? Our queen is almost 100 years old, but, this king was different. This king was called Josiah, and when he became king, he was just 8 years old. Can you imagine that? Becoming king when you're 8 years old? I know if it was me, the first thing I would do was order my favourite food each and every day so that I could eat all the amazing things that I love to eat. But that's not what Josiah did. I would probably also, if it was me, order lots of toys that I would love to play with and order everyone to play with me. But that's not what Josiah did either. And I'd probably also ban all the things I didn't like and perhaps even get rid of all the people I didn't like as well. But that's not what Josiah did either. You see, Josiah didn't forget about his promise to God. Josiah wanted to do what was right by God. Josiah was a really, really, well, good king, because he did what was right by God, and he tried to do what God wanted him to do. Now, as I said, he had a bit of a problem in the beginning because, well, when he became king, he was only 8 years old, and so it wasn't just him running the country. He would have had lots and lots of grown-ups, lots and lots of advisors who would have been making sure that, he didn't do something crazy. And so, well, actually, when he was quite young, they perhaps didn't listen to him as much as they should. But as he got older, well, they had to listen to him because, well, he was the king. And so when he was 16 years old, he made a decision. He decided that in everything he was going to put God first. In everything he thought or said, God was going to be the one that would be in charge, and God would be the one that he would follow. And then when he got a bit older, he decided, well, it wasn't enough for just him to be following God, but actually, he knew that the people doing things that were bad and praying to these idols was making God really, really sad. And so when he was 20, he said, it's not just me that needs to follow God, but we need to explain to all the people that they need to follow God as well. So he called together all of his advisors and he said, look, enough is enough. We need to sort things out. I want you to go out into the whole country and I want you to destroy every single idol that you find. I want the people to realize and know that there is only one true God, and actually that's the God that they need to be following. So that's just what his advisors did. They went out and they smashed all the idols and they told everyone that they needed to be worshipping and following the one true God. But then, when he got to be 26 years old, he decided to do something else to help the people know and follow God. You see, he lived in a great city called Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, there used to be an amazing and incredible temple where the people would have worshipped God. But now, well, it was all falling down and it was in ruins. It was quite a mess. And Josiah said, this isn't good enough. God is amazing and incredible. God is fantastic. We need to make an incredible temple for him once again where everybody can come to worship him. So that's just what he did. He called all of his advisors together and he said, we need to get some money from the people to help us to get all the materials we need to make the temple amazing again so that everybody can worship God. So that's just what they did. They started to gather all the materials together and they started to rebuild the temple. And it was going really, really well. And King Josiah was really happy because he knew that this was a good thing to do. And he was sure that this was what God wanted him to do. But then one day, his royal advisor, Shaphan, came rushing in. He said, King, we found it. What, said Josiah, what have you found? Underneath all of the rubble and everything else in the temple, we found the book of the law. Wow, said Josiah. He was so excited. You see, up to this point, he'd just been doing what he thought was the right thing to do, what he thought God was telling him to do, but now they'd found the book of the law. The book that God had given to Moses, that actually now they would know just what God wanted them to do. Josiah said, quick, read it to me, tell me everything it says. And Shaphan started to read, and you were sure that Josiah would have been really, really happy to hear all of the things that God wanted him to do, but actually, it made Josiah really, really sad. In fact, Josiah was so sad and so upset that he ripped his clothes. Now, don't do that at home, but back in those days when they were really sad, that's what they used to do, was tear their clothes to show everyone just how sad they were. The reason that Josiah was so sad was because, well, actually as they read through all of the things, he realized that they hadn't been doing any of the things that God wanted them to do. He realized that God's people, the Israelites, had been so bad. And he started to think, God must be really, really sad, but also God must be really angry with us as well. Is there any way that we can sort things out? And the Bible tells us that when we mess up and do things that are wrong, it makes God sad, but it also makes God angry that we've done all of these things. But actually, God, though, still loves us. And God has done something amazing to show just how much he loves us, because God has decided to sort it out for us. He knew that we couldn't sort out this barrier of all these wrong things by ourselves. He knew there was no way that we could get ourselves back to him, so he had to make a way by coming to us. You see, the Bible says that God loved us so much that he came as Jesus, down out of heaven, down to earth. And that Jesus lived a perfect life. And at the end of his life, he was put on a cross. Now, normally people were put on a cross to die because they were being punished for things that they'd done that are wrong. But as I said, Jesus lived a perfect life, and so he wasn't being punished for anything that he'd done wrong, but he was being punished for all the wrong things that everyone else has done. So that anyone could turn to him, say they were sorry for all those things they've done that are wrong, and they could be forgiven and become part of his family. That actually now there was a way for us to get back to God again by putting our trust in Jesus. Well, Josiah decided to call all the people together. And he got the book of the law read to all of them. And actually, they became really sad because they realized just how sad they'd made God. And all the people of Israel, God's people, decided to choose to turn and say they were sorry to God and ask for God's forgiveness. And they said that they wanted to do what was good and right. And I'm sure that that made God look a bit like this by here. You see, with God's people doing what God had asked them to do, instead of being sad, I'm sure that God was really, really glad. Because now that they'd seen his book of the law and they'd heard it, actually they did what was right by him. And you know, when I heard about what God had done for me, about how he'd come to die on that cross for me, I turned to him and I said, God, I'm really, really sorry that I've done things that have made you really, really sad. God, will you please forgive me? And you know, the amazing thing is that the Bible says that Jesus didn't just die, but 3 days later, he came back to life. And he came back to life so that he could actually do this by here. He came back to life to show that he could, well, forgive anyone who put their trust in him. And you know, I realized that putting my trust in Jesus and being, well, forgiven was the most amazing and incredible thing ever. And I'm sure that King Josiah and all the Israelites realized the same as well, because the Bible tells us that whilst King Josiah lived, all of Israel did what was good and pleasing to God, because they realized how amazing it was that God had forgiven them. And so King Josiah, even though he became king when he was only 8 years old, actually was an amazing and incredible king, actually an amazing and incredible part of God's family, because he helped the rest of God's family here on earth to realize how important it was for them to turn away from what they were doing that was wrong and to follow and trust the one true God. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story just as much as you did the first time, if not even more. Now, here's a couple of questions just to make you think a little bit more about this week's story. Now, we saw at the beginning, didn't we, that God was really, really sad. But what were the Israelites doing that made him feel really, really sad? And what kind of things do we do that make God feel sad as well? Now, when Josiah got to be a bit older, he decided, didn't he, that he was going to send his advisors out into the land to destroy all of the idols that had been made. Now we don't pray to or worship statues, but is there anything that we think is more important in our life than God? Because actually the Bible says that anything that we think is more important than God in our lives is actually, well, an idol, a bit like those statues that they had in Israel. Now then, when Shaphan read the book of the law to Josiah, Josiah became really sad, didn't he? Because he was sure that God would be angry with them for all the things they've done that are wrong. But we said, didn't we, that God has done something, that even though he's angry about our sin, the things we do that are wrong, and turn away, the times we turn away from him, actually, he's done something incredible to show just how much he loves us and that we can be forgiven and be part of his family. What did God do to sort out that problem of our sin? Well, just a couple of questions to make you think a little bit more about the story. If you're unsure about the answers, as always, message us. We love to hear from you. And we hope that you have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you in Big Fish Kids Club next week. Bye.